and welcome to Football Game Plan's Fantasy Football Starting Lineup. Emery Hunt, the czar of the playbook. That's Chris James. He's at CJ Florida 9. Be sure to smash that subscribe button or follow button on Twitter. The subscribe button you want to smash is at youtube.com/footballgameplan. But Chris is a great follow on Twitter. Make sure you hit follow on Twitter. Follow him on Facebook. Get some good football insight there. I'm at FBGP. Chris, we'll reach the playoffs here in fantasy football. So Chris came up with a fantastic idea, and we're going to take a different approach to the show this week. And we're going to start looking at the games. We're going to start in the 1 o'clock window, primetime tonight on Thursday, but in the 1 o'clock window. Then in the next segment, we'll talk 4 o'clock and late primetime games before we get into our starting and sitting lineup. So we're going to take a look at the games, each game on the schedule, and look at the matchups and see what is fantasy relevant in the matchup. So Chris, without further ado, let's start with tonight's game between the Patriots and the Rams. It's going to be a good one.
Absolutely should be a good one. Look, we saw the brilliance of Bill Belichick last week against what was a hot offense in another LA squad. So this one, you're getting one of the better defensive teams as well going up against that Bill Belichick offense. So I'm actually expecting a bit of a slugfest in this one. Not a lot of points scored. You're going to see that defensive line for the Rams eat, and you're going to see the Patriots shell over the top and not let big plays occur. So the people you have on both sides, understand this. The receivers for the Rams are the ones that you're usually playing, or even Jared Goff if you're still throwing that biscuit out there. Temper your expectation on their points this week. Bill Belichick's going to make sure that no big plays happen so that the game can kind of flow the way he wants it to. On the opposite side, they're going to stack up and make sure that the ball needs to be thrown. So you might want to temper your expectations on a guy like Damian Harris and even Cam Newton's legs because, again, they want him to put the ball in the air. They're going to funnel it that way. So you may end up getting a big play over the top in your daily fantasy leagues, maybe a bird in daily fantasy because he should be pretty cheap.
Chicago is playing host to Houston in what should be a get-right game for Deshaun Watson, considering the fact that, the Bears just are struggling on offense, which allows their defense to get tired and all that good stuff like that. But how do you see this one playing out as far as the Texans and Bears, who quietly still have a shot at the playoffs in the NFC?
Well, it's not going to happen this week because, I was giving the Bears defense the excuse that Akeem Hicks wasn't in there. He got back in there and they still are doing the same stuff. So I think it's just a mental thing at this point. Deshaun Watson does not have mental hangups in general. So he's going to take advantage of that. Expect him to put the ball in the air. Expect them to utilize Kiki QT a little bit more. And then even use those running backs in the passing game. So I expect Deshaun Watson to put up the numbers that he's been putting up all season. On the Bears side, still expect Allen Robinson to continue to eat. Even without a touchdown last week, he still had a fantasy relevant game. And you might have a sleeper somewhere in there with a guy like Cole Kmet, who they drafted in, I believe, the second round. He might end up getting you a touchdown in the tight end wasteland.
I didn't realize this game was being played in Chicago. I don't know if Watson has played the Bears in Chicago, but my goodness, you talk about Watson versus Trubisky in Chicago with the Bears fans having to watch for 3 hours.
The torture.
Oh, I can't imagine that torture, man. I feel for those Bears fans. But down in Cincinnati, you have a very good matchup, I think, with a lot of young stars, up-and-coming stars in the Cowboys and the Bengals. So what's your fantasy take on this one?
See, this is one of those juicy games where neither the defenses are particularly good, even though they have talent, but the offenses are talented. So even though you should have tempered expectations for those receivers on the Bengals side because Brandon Allen is not Joe Burrow, they can still be fantasy relevant because the Cowboys secondary hasn't been up to snuff this year. So you can expect some decent points. T. Higgins continues to get targets, so you can keep playing him. On the opposite side, listen, it's a pick your poison thing. I think that Zeke won't be able to run wild like everyone expects, but I do expect him to be able to put the ball in the air, score some points, and Zeke to even have a solid day in a game that should be one of the more fun games of this week to watch.
I'm excited for this next one. You got Kansas City and Miami. Should be a good matchup, a good barometer for where the Dolphins are as a football team. Fantasy-wise, I know you're going to have to look at as far as Kansas City is concerned, correct?
This is actually such an excellent matchup for strength versus strength, where the Dolphins have built their defense by putting high-priced corners out there with, I want to call it exotic front, some guys that are plug and play. They might not be the best, quote-unquote, individual players, but they play well together. And this is going to get Kansas City some trouble. I think that you still clearly are starting the Kelceys and the Tyreek Hills of the world. Sammy Watkins probably won't be the guy this week because he's going to draw a matchup, whether it's Byron Jones or Xavier Howard. So I think this will be one of those games where you're still going to start your starters that you start every week, but you're going to have to temper expectations. I don't expect this explosion that Kansas City usually has, more of a game like they had last week.
This is an interesting game we're about to talk about because you look at Arizona and you talk about great matchups, how KC and Miami is. This is another good one. Their offense against that Giants defense, and who has been playing really well every game of the season, has gotten to the point where now they are a significant strength to this football team.
Absolutely. And they actually thrive against quarterbacks that are mobile in nature. You saw what they did to Russell Wilson last week. That was Russell Wilson. Leonard Williams is playing like a man possessed who just keeps doing things and makes you wonder why the Jets even decided to trade him. And that whole defensive front, they're playing really well. So I expect for them to be able to control Kyler Murray this week, a guy who I still think is a little more injured than they want to let on. And that Arizona offense. I actually think this will be a sneaky one where the Giants will hold that offense down, and there's not going to be as much fantasy value as you may have expected coming into this game outside of Evan Ingram.
What are your year makes when you a season of year makes or what have you? I don't know what the saying, but you know what I'm trying to say, because last year the Cardinals took it to the Giants out here at MetLife. Chase Edmonds had a field day. It was raining. Daniel Jones threw 2 interceptions, and the Giants defense just couldn't stop Arizona, and the offense couldn't get it going. So flip side, what a difference a year makes. That's the saying. You look at what it looks like now, and the Giants defense looks threatening, and their offense seems to be productive. So it's going to be interesting. If I had to pick a game that was going to be the fantasy explosion of the week, it probably will be this next one, and that's Minnesota taking on Tampa Bay.
And, the expectation is that Tampa defense, which is really good, is going to shut down everything Minnesota does, especially with the run game. Here's the deal. Dalvin Cook's still Dalvin Cook. You're still going to start him. He might not go for 200, but I think this will be the time when that Tampa Bay defense doesn't respond the way you expected. I'm on board with what you're saying, Emery. Outside of one particular player who you'll see in my start him and sit him, I think that Minnesota offense will thrive in most situations, and I think the Tampa offense will thrive, especially the running back core, as they start to actually feed Ronald Jones more carries to make this offense more balanced. And yeah, you can see a 34-31 type game in this particular situation.
These two teams I feel like are a year away. And so when watching this game, I'm looking at it from a scouting perspective because I just like the talent that they have accumulated on both sides of the ball for both teams. And that's Denver against Carolina.
Man, that Denver receiving core, once they get healthy, because we forget, Cortland Sutton didn't play this year really, right?
True.
Imagine what's going to happen as they get a year more into that system. But yeah, you look at it and you say, okay, what's going on with the offense on both sides? Again, explosive players, but I like what Carolina's defense is doing, and I actually expect them to give the Broncos some trouble with that zone scheme they run. Drew Lock has not done as well as I would expect it against the zone this year, so I really, really like a couple of players on the Carolina side, and you can throw a bone with Noah Fant probably having a relevant fantasy day on the opposite side of the ball. So temper your expectations on those receivers, though, from the Denver side if you are starting any of them.
And you look at wrapping up this segment in Florida with Jacksonville, who has been competitive every week since they won their first game and lost the rest of them. But they've been competitive. They play host to Tennessee, who is looking like they're kind of faltering right now. They got beat down by the Browns last weekend, but can Jacksonville rebound and maybe have big days by certain guys out there on the perimeter?
I think that they actually can have a relevant game, but there's one thing that sticks in my mind. This should be a good matchup for Ryan Tannehill, right? You should be able to do some things on his side, but Jacksonville never does well against Derrick Henry, even when they had a great defense. So this should be a big Derrick Henry day. And on the opposite side, because they might have to play some catch up, you're correct. You might see guys like Colin Johnson. You might see a Laviska Shenault. Those guys will have fantasy relevant days because, again, they're playing with a professional quarterback. And he's getting them the ball and allowing them to use that talent. And they're getting in the end zone. They will be competitive, but they should be playing from behind the entire time while being competitive, if that makes sense to you all.
Yeah, I love the professional quarterback. Read between the lines, folks. See what he's saying and figure it out when you get home. But we'll take a step back, take a step aside, and we'll be back with more fantasy football starting lineup. Football Game Plan is brought to you in part by Ninth and Lux. Visit the website ninethandlux.com and check out the clothing gallery. Do You Music with featured artist IW and his latest album, Season 2. You can check that out on iTunes as well as doyoumusic.com. Nesby Phipps, art, life, entertainment. NesbyPhipps.com. Grind It Out Fitness. Visit the website grinditoutfitness.com and download the app.
Well, the game of football has taught me so many things, man. Now, think about the huddle we have right now, right? I tell people this all the time. There's a reason why they call it a huddle. You know, people have been huddling all their lives, trying to find ways to enhance each other's lives. The great teams do that all the time. The great teams do that. The better the huddle, the better the team. And so it's simple, man, how if you huddle for all the right reasons, we wouldn't have Ferguson. We wouldn't have some of the challenges that we have in our society. But as we all know, there's always a moment when somebody doesn't belong in the huddle. And yet we have to continue to move on. We got to continue to play. So the game of life, man, is always starting with the huddle. And for me, I'm lucky enough to know that, you know, by the graces of God, man, it's been a nice huddle. It's been a nice huddle. And if I just keep making sure that he's in front of me, I'm gonna be all right.
And welcome back to Football Game Plan's Fantasy Football Starting Lineup. Emory Hunt, the czar of the playbook. That's Chris James at CJ Florida9. Subscribe on YouTube and follow him on Twitter. All right, Chris, now we move on to the 4 o'clock slate of games, as well as some of the primetime games, or the primetime games that are on the schedule. And we'll start out in Vegas, where they play host to the Colts. This could be a potential wild card playoff game or a playoff elimination game.
Exactly. So here's what I actually think happens, and I'm glad you brought that up. These are two teams that preseason were designed to do what? Strong offensive lines. They wanted to run the ball. As we've seen throughout the season, they've been a little more judicious with throwing the ball. I actually expect bombs over Baghdad in this game. I think that they're going to go over the top. T.Y. Hilton, who apparently was on hiatus earlier and someone was masquerading as him, is now back and took his body back over. They'll get Henry Ruggs and Nelson Aguilar and those guys all involved. I think this is going to be another one of those higher scoring games than expected, because you'll see a lot of over the top throws from these quarterbacks who usually are fairly risk averse, but they got to go for it in this particular setup because the playoffs are calling.
All right, you ready for this one? The Jets take flight out to the Pacific Northwest, hoping not to be sleepless in Seattle. Tied it all together, like puns on puns on puns. But do the Jets have a chance in this game? And if so, who stands out for Gang Green? I'll see myself out.
So will the Jets. And here's the problem. The biggest problem occurred last week. That was a sneaky way for them to win a game. I thought they had a chance to do this next week. It reminded me of, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago when the Tampa Bay Bucks went out there and shocked Seattle when they were the worst team in the NFL. I thought that was going to happen next week. But with the way they lost last week and with the way the Seattle Seahawks lost last week, Seattle is going to punish the Jets, who do not have an active defense coordinator at this point. So if you have the Jets have a chance because they have to. Ty Johnson could have a pretty good fantasy day, but I expect Jamison Crowder to eat because that's what's going to be available. A lot of underneath dinks and dunks, but to be honest, start every Seattle Seahawk that you can, even Will Dissly.
You know, low key, man, I like some of the Jets pieces on paper, and if they get any consistency at quarterback and maybe a solid foundation back, they have something there to work with. But it's a year away, and it also depends on who's going to be coaching them and who's also going to be at quarterback. But Detroit now finds themselves also in the playoff hunt, and they play host to Green Bay, whom they, I think, match up well against on offense, on paper at least. But Who do you see in having a fantasy day here against these two old-time NFC North rivals?
Right. And I sit here and I say this. Detroit, they're going through the motions. They were able to take advantage of a Chicago team that literally can't close out a game. In this particular matchup, I expect for the Packers to just bludgeon them. I think that what they're going to do up front is they're going to try to take advantage of a situation where you have a new coaching staff, or a new head coach, I should say. They just got that first big win. The emotional letdown will happen. So I expect the Packers, especially those running backs, to do really well. Devontae Adams is always a must start, even when he's not going to have his best game. And on the opposite side, I do have a sleeper that is on that Detroit side. That's Quentin Cephas. I think that I like the way he positions himself to catch the ball, a lot of body control. And Jair Alexander will probably be on Marvin Jones, especially if Kenny Golladay is out yet again, which I expect. So Quentin Cephas could be that number 2 guy who can actually take advantage. So he could be a sneaky play for you if you have a hole somewhere in your lineup.
I'm a big fan of Cephas and what he brings to the table. Like them at Wisconsin. Here's a game that's going to be interesting. New Orleans at Philadelphia. The Jalen Hurts-led Philadelphia Eagles play host to the Taysom Hill-led New Orleans Saints, or Drew Brees, whoever's going to get the start. But the main story here is Jalen Hurts, the starting quarterback for Philadelphia.
Absolutely. And like we discussed on last week's show, now he's the starter. What's going to happen? I think it helps out the receivers because he's more willing to do one-on-one balls down the sideline. They might do more pop passes, move the pocket. Plus, he changes the math. Carson Wentz just wasn't physically moving the ball, not running, not doing anything. Jalen Hurts has no problem with that. He'll take off. He'll run through you if necessary. So he should actually offer that stellar New Orleans defense some problems this upcoming week. And on the New Orleans side of the ball, I don't expect a lot in the run game early on because that front for the Philadelphia Eagles functions fairly well. But I do expect them to go over the top quite a bit on some play action and take advantage. You can see Emmanuel Sanders actually having a chance, especially if it is Taysom Hill at quarterback, because he has a little more arm strength than Drew Brees has at this stage of his career.
I see this upcoming game, as a potential high-scoring one, and that's Atlanta and the Los Angeles Chargers. Both coaches need a win. Both offenses can move the football, if we're being completely honest, and both defenses have been helter-skelter all season long. So how do you see this one shaking out?
Sure. So on the Atlanta side, just go ahead and put Todd Gurley aside. Unfortunately, he's not the same Todd Gurley. Maybe I'm wrong and I'm willing to take that one, but it just hasn't been.
He's a professional running back?
At this stage of his career, he is kind of a professional running back. He's no Frank Gore. But with those receivers, look, Julio's going to be Julio. Virtually no matter who he's playing, Julio's going to be Julio, so I expect him to show up in this game. Matt Ryan, hopefully you don't have to play him because he just doesn't have that high of a possible ceiling unless there's a 5-touchdown output. On the opposite side of the ball, with all honesty, I do expect the Chargers to get back right. Last week, they just got taken advantage of by the mastermind, and it all started to go downhill. I expect Justin Herbert to get back on track for you fantasy owners. He won't have 2 bad weeks in a row because even if he can't pass the ball, his legs will work. But the big day is going to be from Austin Eckler. He should have a massive day, catch the ball out of the backfield and running it in what could be a high-scoring game, even though I have the Chargers winning fairly easily.
And this game we're going to talk about next is a PPR Super Bowl, because I see targets on targets on targets for everybody, and that's Washington and San Francisco. So do you agree? And if not, where do you see the advantage for both teams?
I'm going to make a bold statement. 75% of the passes will not go past 7 yards past the line of scrimmage. That's my bold prediction. Look, Nick Mullins, he's done a fairly good job in filling in for Jimmy Garoppolo, but yes, there'll be a lot of those pop passes. Try to take advantage of that very fast-flowing defensive line. Try not to throw the ball over Montez Sweat because we see what happens when you try that. On the opposite side, Alex Smith, who kudos to him for still being able to do what he does. I don't know why people keep dropping back off his receivers, but neither here nor there. He's going to continue to do that. He's going to find Logan Thomas. He's going to find whoever is the quote-unquote check down, but he'll put the ball where they can run with it after the catch. You're going to see a lot of, like you say, check downs, but I expect Terry McLaurin to actually have a solid game in this one, considering he didn't in last week's game. I think he does in this week's.
Pittsburgh and Buffalo meet up. This is a game where both teams are to me, very similar. Both quarterbacks to me are very similar, despite being on separate ends of the age spectrum. A young Ben Roethlisberger looks a lot like Josh Allen, and I'm pretty sure an old Josh Allen will look a lot like current Ben Roethlisberger. So who do you see having the fantasy advantage in this ball game for both teams?
So I actually see the fantasy advantage being obviously with Josh Allen, because unfortunately Pittsburgh seems to just be getting hit with the injury bug now. I don't know how well Spillane could play if he even comes back, but I think that attrition is going to hurt them because Pittsburgh's done really well against the run. Buffalo doesn't believe in the run. They're just going to throw the ball over the top. On the opposite side, Deontay Johnson, he's had the case of the drops, but now he's going to have a case of the Tre'Davious Whites, which is not going to be good for him. So I expect a big game from a guy like a Chase Claypool and even an emerging James Washington, who, yes, it's fantasy playoffs. This is more of a daily comment. James Washington could be a great daily fantasy play considering his price point's not high, because they're going to have to keep up with a Buffalo offense that is just rolling right now. So expect a lot of over-the-top passes from both sides.
I agree with you there. I could see James Washington being one of those best ball type guys, because he's going to get a chunk play,
Absolutely. And if you haven't played best ball, try it out. It's actually really fun.
Different strategy that's needed. And finally, you look at Baltimore playing the Browns. Should be a fantastic game, as it's going to have a lot riding on it between two AFC North rivals.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned it earlier when we were talking about the Jets and having pieces and just needing some change of staff. Look at what happened with the Cleveland Browns. You put an adult in the room, takes advantage of that talent, and now they are a playoff team that could really upset one of the better teams in the AFC. So here's what I expect from this game. The Browns are rolling right now, and they figure, hey, we're going to keep this going. We're going to do what we need to do against the Baltimore Ravens. Quietly, with all those corners that Baltimore has, they're one of the better run defenses in the NFL. I think they'll be able to shut down, not fully, but make it difficult for Nick Chubb and company to just run that simple game that they've been running, making Baker Mayfield have to throw the ball, which he's proven he can, but can he do it without the benefit of play action? So here's my expectation. I expect a tempered value from Chubb, higher value for Kareem Hunt, because they're going to have to throw the ball out of the backfield more. And if you're playing in PPR, which most people are, look for a lot of targets to a guy like Jarvis Landry, because they'll have to go underneath. On the opposite side, don't play any of the running backs. It's a Lamar Jackson game and a quiet Hollywood Brown game for him to get right and get you some points.
So we'll step aside once again, come back with Chris James's starting, sitting, and sleeper lineup here on Football Game Plan's Fantasy Football starting lineup.
I cannot get enough of football. I watch it on every level.
The emotional release, whether it's an exciting play that gets you all jacked up and juiced, or whether it's the fact that you're able to pour everything you have. Whatever frustration you had that week, you can put into that first kickoff coverage, that first block that you have, whatever it might be.
And I couldn't think of anything better to do to fill that void that you have as a football player than to get into coaching.
You get a chance to release a lot of emotion that you otherwise have no place to release. There's nothing else like that.
Again, the relationships you build and the people you're around and watching the guys compete, not just on the football field, but in life after they get done playing. It's just an amazing game.
Football Game Plan is brought to you in part by Financial Coaching LLC, investment, retirement, security. Stewardship Credit, financial growth is in your hands. Stewardshipcredit.com. Adrienne Marie Photo, photographer, writer, management. AdrienneMariePhotography.com. Lock Multimedia.
To order your copy of the Go-Go Offense by Coach Brennan Marion on footballgameplan.com/GoGoOffense. Coach Marion goes through the ins and outs of his explosive offense, one that's tearing up the college football field and putting a lot of points on the scoreboard. Again, you can order your copy at footballgameplan.com/GoGoOffense.
And welcome back. Now it's time for the ever so popular Chris James starting, sitting, and sleeper lineup. Chris, let's get this thing rolling with your starting lineup for Week 14, which is now the fantasy football playoffs.
Absolutely. And so this guy, if you have him on your roster, you missed out with him for multiple weeks. But the last 2 weeks have been really good and then not so good. expect great this week, and that's Austin Eckler. Listen, an Atlanta defense that does struggle against the pass, but especially with running backs coming out of the backfield who catch passes, and no matter what Justin Herbert shows up this week, if they need to feed the ball via the carry to Austin Eckler, he'll do it. I expect multiple touchdowns from him this week.
Should be a great game, man. I really do like that matchup between Atlanta and the Chargers. And, when we look at your sitting lineup, it's always interesting because you'll have one, maybe two studs on this sitting lineup. And we know sitting means temper your expectations for the production over where they're projected to go for this upcoming weekend.
Absolutely. And this guy, near and dear to my heart, we're Louisiana guys. He went to college in Louisiana, and he's done really well this year, and that's Justin Jefferson. I expect for Adam Thielen to play in the slot if he does play, which should be playing. And you know what's going to happen? Carlton Davis, who outside of Tyreek Hill having his day, has done a great job this year. So he'll probably blanket Justin Jefferson for the game. They'll go in another direction. They have a lot of pieces, and Justin Jefferson, unfortunately, will be the lack of beneficiary of the particular situation on this day coming up.
I'm always excited to take a look at your sleeper lineup because there's guys that we like to say maybe are, professional players, but they end up on your sleeper list. Take it, for instance, last week you had Mr. Trubisky, a professional quarterback that played really well statistically up until that last fumble that cost his team the game. So who's the biggest sleeper you have this week?
And I mentioned a guy earlier, and I like Quentin Cephas. Again, it's not going to be a person who you'll definitely play in some of these lineups, but if you play best ball, if you're in a deeper league, he's a guy that could be there for you if you need a fill-in. And if you're in a standard league, here's a guy who's starting to tick up in targets, Cole Kmet. Just think about it. Drafted him in the second round for a reason. That's why they have him. And I think that he, especially in the tight end wasteland, could be a good start for you this week and could win you a playoff game.
So that's it for this edition of Football Game Plan's Fantasy Football Starting Lineup. I'm Emory Hunt, the czar of the playbook. That is Chris James. Be sure to follow him on Twitter at CJFlorida9. Follow him on Facebook as well. And subscribe to the Football Game Plan Network located at youtube.com/footballgameplan.